Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter LaBelle. By all accounts, Joe Biden is intending to end his presidency with a bang, literally. And by doing so, he aims to saddle Donald Trump with his foreign policy failure called the Ukraine Project. Many in the Trump orbit seem to have no problem with this. Cross-talking Trump and Ukraine, I'm joined by my guest, John Laughland in Paris. He's a university lecturer in history and political philosophy. In Plymouth, we have Patrick Henningsen. He is the editor and founder of 21st Century Wire. And in Lisbon, we cross to Alexander Guerrero. He is an international legal analyst. Gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. All right, let's start out with John. John, over the last few days, there's been a lot of inside baseball about, what Trump's going to do with Ukraine. And we have this a wide variety, wide spectrum of opinions coming from people that presumably will find themselves in Trump's official orbit in January. But let me ask you, let's ask some very broad, simple questions that most people in the mainstream don't even get to hear. John, the United States and the UK, through NATO and their proxy Ukraine, are sending missiles into the heart of Russia. Well, does Russia have the right to retaliate against the UK and the United States?
Well, the question of right, I think, is irrelevant. It's a bit like the question of whether Israel has the right to exist. In international relations, what counts is not right, but might. And here we are.
Well, Russia has the might and the right, I would say. Go ahead.
Well, yes. I don't disagree. I'm not saying it doesn't have the right. I'm just saying that that is not a useful tool for analysis in international relations, because wars are waged exactly when there is a disagreement about right. And ultimately, it's might that decides. Look, we're all here sitting in different parts of Europe. You're in Moscow, I'm in Paris. The other commentators are around the world. We don't know what Biden or whoever is running the United States is going to do. We can't know that, not only because we're not close and don't have access to the internal decision making, but also because the people themselves don't know. Because in a war situation, everything depends on the decisions of the opposite side. Now, all we can say, I think, as commentators, is we know the general lines. So we know that the Americans are programmed for violence and more violence. I think that's been clear now for 20 or 30 years. They don't really have any other tools in their toolbox than that. Russia, by contrast, does, of course, it has violence at its disposal, but it also has a regime which, as far as I can tell, is very calculating and very rational, and knows that it mustn't push things too far, or at least knows the risks of pushing things too far. So, yes, on the one hand, I think that Biden is playing a totally nihilistic game. That's what it seemed like at first a few days ago when he announced this thing. He announced these missiles being sent into Russia. Nihilistic because the goal was simply to prevent Trump from negotiating a peace. But there's another reading, which the retired general who's been appointed to the Ukraine portfolio outlined on Fox News. He said, well, maybe this is a clever ploy so that Trump can then come back from that and have some kind of olive branch to. So we don't know. We do not know. In my opinion, the question is, if we think, as I do, that Russia is winning on the battlefield, of course that can all go up in nuclear smoke, but leaving aside that scenario, I think the question is, how far can Russia go in terms of its victory without inflicting a humiliating defeat on the incoming administration in the United States?
Well, that's a really good point.
Well done.
But Defeat is defeat, and this is something that I've talked about with you and others on this program ever since the start of the special military operation. The West, I'm going to direct this to Patrick, the West deals in controlling narratives, okay? But narratives in reality, they're very rarely the same, because you want a narrative that gives the impression that you are being able to create a reality. Well, this administration has bungled that up pretty badly. But Patrick, this whole discussion about, Trump and 24 hours end of the conflict, I tend to think this conflict is going to end on the battlefield, not at the negotiation table. Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, Donald Trump's pre-sold this as he's going to get a great deal. He's going to, he's got a mandate from the American people to wind this conflict down. He's going to come back with a great deal. The problem is, and I doubt, looking at the so-called subject matter experts that the Trump administration has selected, I doubt that they have the knowledge and the appreciation for the actual situation as it's developed the last 3 years and as it is now. And because and Donald Trump himself has a very probably scant understanding of the depth in the eight ball that the United States and NATO are actually behind, and that Ukraine itself is behind this conflict. There is no good deal for NATO or for the West or for the United States. Or there's no victorious. One advisor saying that if Putin doesn't negotiate with Trump, we're going to open the spigots for aid. It's going to make everything we've given Zelensky thus far look like peanuts. Well, that's music to Moscow's ears as far as I'm concerned, because this is death by 1,000 cuts for NATO, and it means Ukraine's going to be weaker. It's going to be a dysfunctional rump state, and they might very well lose Odessa in the process. And from a geostrategic point of view, that's game over for NATO's southern front as far as
really interesting, Patrick. I just wonder, all of these pseudo intellectuals opining all the time, do they even understand the significance of Odessa? I tend to doubt it here. Alexander, one of the things that I've been saying from the very beginning is, why would Moscow negotiate with any of these people? We've already gone through Minsk I, Minsk II, Istanbul. I mean, again, I don't want war to continue, but the only way for this war to come to an end is a determination on the battlefield, because the West has delegitimized itself as a negotiating partner. At least that's my point of view. Alexander.
That's why Russia basically needs to keep proceeding with its operations on the battlefield, just to not only consolidate these regions where they are at presently, but also to achieve more and more lands which will be able to be, not, I wouldn't say negotiated, but that could be seen in the future as a right of Russia to hold and to have its own protection and security with this kind of buffer zone built in Ukraine. So if the United States want to keep feeding Ukrainian forces to use, for example, long-range missiles or even medium-range missiles against Russian soil, this means that Russia will have to decide that they need to continue more and more in the interior of Ukraine until maybe they reach Kiev. Because if what Russia needs is security guarantees, and presently Russia has none, meaning that, and also Russia has another thing, which is they have the ability to choose whether they want to have the initiative or not on the battlefield. What we have on the Western side is only attempts to react. And the more we try to react against Russia by pushing them to the limit, this means that Russia will not be able to sit on the table and discuss any kind of preconditions, because Russia has, like it was said before, not only right, but also might. And even these last missiles, these last weapons used on the battlefield, this has the best of two worlds. This means that Russia can use a kind of weapon that no one in the West has an equivalent, but also it can have a deterrent effect, but at the same time, it plays the same role as nuclear weapons because it doesn't have the side effects. It can be more crucial, more localized kind of use. So if Russia has this one of a kind, why would Russia decide to quit from the beginning the early plans that they have when they started the special military operation? I don't see any reason why they should do so.
And, John, what's really missed in all of this claptrap that we keep hearing is that this in no way, shape, or form is actually helping Ukraine. I mean, this is always missed in these discussions, John.
Yeah, I agree with the two previous speakers. But what I'm trying to emphasize is that war is the continuation of politics by other means. In other words, you fight a war in order to obtain a peace. You fight a war in order to obtain an outcome. And the dilemma I see for Russia now, because as I say, we don't know what the United States is going to do. We know how the American foreign policy and military establishment is structured. It's very one-dimensional. It's war, violence, violence. The Russian side is more nuanced, but in a way that presents a bigger dilemma, because how is Russia, even assuming, as Alexander says, and I'm sure he's right, that there can be progress on the battlefield, maybe even to Kiev or whatever. My question is, the question I'm putting to myself is, how can such military victories, if indeed they occur, lead to a political settlement? That is the problem. Of course, they can lead to a political settlement in Ukraine. There can be regime change in Ukraine. There can be Zelensky can flee and go off to wherever he's got his villa or whatever. That could happen. That's one scenario, probably the only realistic scenario, actually. But as we well know, this is not a war with Ukraine. It's a war with NATO. So how can Russia achieve a victory on the ground by military means and then have a political agreement with NATO when both sides, Russia and NATO, have put the issue of defeat or victory on an existential level? Because Russia says it's an existential threat, and of course NATO says that it's an existential.
But John, let me throw this to Patrick. And I think for Russia it is, because it's fighting the collective West. Okay, and Western countries are supplying material and intelligence and personnel to attack the Russian sovereignty. Russia's not attacking the UK. It's not attacking the United States. Maybe it should. Maybe that's a different conversation. But it is not existential for NATO. It's reputationally, it's maybe existential, but not from a security point of view. That's false, Patrick.
Yeah, it's the problem is that something's got to break. That balancing act of narratives that John just laid out so eloquently there, something's got to break. And the thing, United States isn't going to its position and its approach to this. Europe, however, I think will be the breaking point politically in any way. And what's happening, and I just got back from Central Europe and Hungary, having spoken to people in the Ministry of Defense and so forth there, it's very clear that they want a ceasefire, and they've wanted a ceasefire for a while. So Slovakia, Hungary, Central Europe, the closer you are to the front line, the more sanity you hear. The further away from the front line, the more crazy to talk. So how is this going to play out politically? It's Europe. This isn't sustainable for Europe, for European NATO members. If they ended it today, this Donald Trump and the United States could tout a win for NATO. They've militarized the entirety of the new line of contact between East and West. Trump can say, you got to pay your fair share, spend your 2%.
Patrick, I'm going to have to jump in here. I'm sorry, we have to go to a hard break. And after that hard break, we'll continue our discussion on Trump and Ukraine. Stand with RT. Welcome back to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're talking about Trump and Ukraine. Okay, let's start out with Alexander. I have the solution. Okay, everybody can write it down, put it on a Post-it and put it in your wallet, because Peter Lavelle has the solution. I'm being serious, actually. We need a Helsinki 2.0. What we need to do is we need a European security architecture that fits the realities of today. We work out and then we work in. What do I mean? All players, we solve security issues for the indivisibility of security. The West has forgotten that term. It's not part of their lexicon anymore. And that will solve the Ukraine crisis, the Ukraine dilemma, as we work inwards. We don't start there, we start here, and we go there. Alexander, am I right?
Yeah, Peter. I mean, hasn't Russia been pushing for that for
Yeah.
the last at
It's
least-
not an original idea on my part. Sorry.
Yes. We all know that Russia tried over and over, but the West always rejected it. Why? Because they thought that they could have a domain, the control over all kind of geopolitical decisions worldwide. So until we have this in the West, I think it will be highly unlikely to watch such a scenario to be enforced, not only on the battlefield, but worldwide. I mean, presently, what we have is the West putting itself in a position where you have only an alternative, capitulation, meaning that you have to go for the military solution. And once you get the edge, only after that, they'll finally be able to recognize that there's no other alternative rather than accept that the other side is superior. Instead of having a balance, which is what everyone desires, and it's the best solution for everyone, a multipolar balance worldwide, which will be able to work with all different forces present worldwide. And we could use the United Nations for that. I mean, until now, the United Nations were created for this purpose. And what we are witnessing is one side trying to get the other side fragile and prevail over it and insist on trying to spread its own ideals to the other side. So this is a matter of survival. And this survival can only be achieved through the capitulation of the opponent. So it be, if we as Westerners are putting ourselves in this position, then there's no other option. But the solution, the right solution, of course, is that one that you mentioned. We need a European solution, security solution for everyone. And then when I speak about European, I'm not mentioning what usually in academies we mention it label as Little Europe, which is European Union. Because usually I hear Ursula von der Leyen and other hierarchical bodies from the European Union speaking about Europe as if the European Union is itself Europe, and then we have the rest of the world. But we have Central Europe, we have Eastern Europe, we have all the Balkans, we have Russia, we have Georgia, we have the Caucasus region. All of them are included in Europe. And we should work not only with them, but also with many other players that can help us achieve security, stability, and balance worldwide. We have many other players.
Yeah, well, this is turning into the idealist podcast here. So, John, please pour lots of cold water. Go ahead.
Yes, that's what I would like to do. I'm sorry to say that I think that that's a completely unrealistic scenario. However much like you, I may wish it in another universe, in a parallel universe, in the matrix, beyond the matrix. The fact that you said just now, you started, and I don't think you finished, you said, Alexander did, the Russia has been wanting that since. You didn't finish your sentence, Alexander. Russia has been wanting that since at least 1899, since at least Nicholas II, when Nicholas II convened the first Hague Peace Conference, which was convened under the initiative of the Russian Emperor. Then Russia tried again in 1938, in the run-up to Munich. And the Munich Agreement was scuppered largely because the Western powers refused a collective security agreement. Then obviously there's been, as Peter said, there's been Helsinki in 1971-72. There's the OSCE in 1990. All these attempts have failed. And therefore I would say that the best outcome that we can hope for, and I say this with a heavy heart, is a new Cold War. And I think that's what we will have. The Cold War gave us balance. It was a peace. The Cold War was a peace. It was, yes, a sort of war, but it wasn't a war. And much as I would, once again, I wish there was another outcome, but I can't see one. I can't see one. And I'm afraid, I think that the breakdown has been so severe and so radical, the breakdown in relations, that I absolutely cannot see any way in which there could be a collective security agreement for a generation.
Well, John, you know me well enough. I mean, I like the separation. I let the West go its own way. I mean,
Yes.
I mean, their troubles are not wanted around the world. Okay, they need to resolve their own problems before they export it to everybody else. But Patrick, Professor Mearsheimer, he came up and wrote a paper a little over a year ago called "An Ugly Victory." that Russia will probably achieve because it will be on the battlefield. I have a corollary, much along the lines of what John said, ugly victory, miserable peace. But that's probably what the best that we can hope for. Patrick.
Sure. I mean, the current crisis right now, especially what's happened over the last week, is very instructive if you look at the whole basis of NATO. So what Vladimir Putin said after the ATACMS were launched into Russian territory, the argument from the West is how they sold it is we're allowing Zelensky to use U.S. weapons. That's the argument that the West is selling. What Putin and what Russia is saying is, well, he's doing an Article 5 in reverse. They like to tout this trope, an attack on one is attack on all. Vladimir Putin's challenged the West and saying, well, an attack by one, in this case, the U.S. or Britain or France, we regard as an attack by all. So that's a real crisis from NATO, because think about it. If Russia was to respond to strike a NATO military facility in Poland, for instance, or another country, they've taken enough hits on the chin with regards to missile strikes in Russian territory. How is Europe going to regard that action by Russia? Are they going to look at as a response or an unprovoked attack on NATO? No, I think Europe will make the political calculation that this is getting out of hand. And many in Europe will throw their hands up at that point. The conversation is changing rapidly around this conflict. But they have to make that calculation, Peter, is what I'm saying. In the political realm, this all matters, and it becomes military strategy at the end.
Your logic is. Go ahead, John. The logic is impeccable, but I always write copious notes for these programs, and here's one line here: Western leaders, a group of imbeciles. I mean, how can a group of imbeciles make rational decisions? I mean, these people are not serious. John, I'm sorry. Let me go to you.
No, I know they're not serious, but Patrick is right. Patrick is right. On the other hand, Patrick, you said it's a military decision. It's a political decision. That's what I was referring to earlier. Yes, they are imbeciles, but they are also opportunists. And we've seen with Scholz. Scholz is now fighting an election on the issue of peace. That's not nothing. That's quite big. If the biggest country in Western Europe is fighting an election between peace and war, between the SPD and the CDU. That's not nothing. Macron is over in domestic terms, but he tried, don't forget, in 2022, not very effectively. So, of course, I don't even want to contemplate this scenario, Patrick, that you've just outlined, although it's obviously on the table. What will be the response for Europe? God knows. I think it will be to rally, to double down and rally against Russia, because Europe is programmed that way. But we don't know.
Yeah, but Alexander, what Europe are we talking about here? I mean, as far as I can tell, there's never been an election in the European Union about this conflict, okay? Again, it's an elite agenda. Okay, well, why is Scholz in this dilemma? Because this war is not popular. It's very detrimental to I would even say, well, certainly for the existence of NATO, which could go and passing into the night, and I would be very happy. But irrespective of how much you love or hate the European Union, it's there and it's suffering as a result of this war. But its political elites are not in lockstep with their people. Go ahead, Alexander.
That's right. And what scares me the most is to see and to witness that the European Union, we don't have any kind of elections. We just vote for the European Parliament, and that's it. And from there,
what's that? And what's that?
Arise. And what's that? Parliament has not much powers, as you know. They can only vote for the European Commission, and that's pretty much the powers that the European Parliament has. So it's kind of an attempt to fool everyone in the European Union, the citizens, to demonstrate that they have any power over anything. But in reality, they have absolutely none, because suddenly, out of the blue, you can choose a new European Commission leader. You can choose any commissioners from every European member state, and you are not even going to check, for example, their interests, their pasts. They're just going through the vote and are going to be passed. For example, when I see Kaja Kallas linked to the European Commission, after everything that she has been saying, I don't think she is the right person to push for a peace solution.
Yeah, but Alexander, sorry, the European Union doesn't decide military policy in spite of its claims.
That's right.
So what we need to concentrate on is the national policy of Britain, France, and Germany, and of course of the United States. That's what matters.
That's right. And also, if you realize when you check about the United States, you can find also the same. When we speak about Biden's policies, well, Biden's policies, they are not his own policies. They are surely developed with a lot of actors that most of them, we don't know who they are. And Biden is only the parrot who brings the message. He's the news who brings the message.
And let me give John the last minute. Will Trump be any different? Can he be any different? John.
Well, of course, I think he will be different. I mean, I say, of course, I think he will be different. I mean, in spite of everything, in spite of the massive reservations I have about his appointments, he is a narcissist. He wants to be big. He wants to pull off a great show. He wants to put on a great show.
Legacy.
Yeah. And, there have been lots of big promises, putting an end to the warfare state and so on. He loves a deal. As I think I mentioned earlier, the general who is appointed for relations with Ukraine claims that the escalation by Biden is a way of giving him some room for maneuver.
General Kelly, his well-known to Fox News viewers. Other than that, we'll have to see. Gentlemen, that's all the time. I want to thank my guests in Paris, Plymouth, and in Lisbon. And of course, I want to thank our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. Remember, CrossTalk rules.